I next want to introduce Hannah Shostack, a former researcher and bill drafter for the New Jersey Office of Legislative Service. I think you were the chief researcher and bill drafter there. Hannah has spent almost all of her career working on legislation involving economic development, including tax increment financing and the revenue allocation district financing of revenue. I think you actually did the first drafts of the bills. The red bill, was it, Hannah, that became law? The only. And I think I'm looking forward to hearing Hannah talk about the process as this went through and how this came to be, and a little bit of a peek behind the curtain about what went on. Hannah Shostack.
Thanks, Deb. First of all, as a longtime staff person, I have to sing the praises of Sarah because I was the recipient of many requests by Sarah for information, and I can attest to the fact that she's probably one of the most dogged researchers I've come across in any field. And in economic development, it's been particularly helpful for Sarah to be there because she asks questions and does impeccable research in an area that few people pay enough attention to. So I appreciate being asked to be here today, and also to have a chance to be on a panel with Sarah, who I think has done such incredible work, including this report. I began working at OLS in early 1984, and it's odd to be here talking about what I did because most of the time I was a ghostwriter and couldn't talk about what I did, and the worst nightmare of an OLS person would be called by the Star Ledger. So it's, you know, even when I was called upon, I had to kind of go through some moves about what I could say and what I could not say, because this takes me back into the role of being somebody who avoided the public spotlight at all costs. I worked at OLS from '84 until I left to go to the Partisans in 2007, and then to the governor's office. And I did economic development the entire time. And so I had the great good fortune to see this process from many different institutional perspectives. So I'll try to be brief, covering a whole sweep of my professional career and hopefully some observations inspired by Sarah's report and her recommendations. So my early TIF experience was with the Newark Performing Arts Center. Governor Kane was in power when I came to OLS, and he was very committed to building a performing arts center in Newark. And one of the ways that people seized upon to finance it in part was through tax increment financing. And I was the bill drafter who had the opportunity to try to put this into some kind of bill draft. And I probably, in my house somewhere, I probably still have those bill drafts with like 15,000 findings and declarations to justify it. But at that time, the thing that Kane was most proud of was the state bond rating, which was like the best of the best. And I came into a state that had a very conservative fiscal culture, and TIF was seen as gambling. It was high stakes gambling. So for all the hours and hours of conversations that involved Treasury, in those days the government was staffed. When I think of all the people who showed up at those meetings, I was a lowly bill drafter, but we had Feather O'Connor, and we had all these high level people from Treasury and all the Newark folks, because we were scared stiff. TIF really made New Jersey nervous. So in spite of having gone through hours and hours of bill drafts and discussions, and I don't even know if the bill ever saw the light of day, but we clearly weren't ready for TIF. It was just too speculative. But of course, I kept the bill draft. I hung around. And in the early 2000s, we had a lobbyist with a client who wanted to build an upscale shopping mall in Flemington. And there I was with the old bill draft that was talking about an area, because it was Larry Goldman's vision of a plan for the Performing Arts Center in the surrounding area. And a footnote, if we would, years later looking back, we would have lost our shirts, but never mind. So early 2000s with the RAD bill, which started as TIF and it became RAD, and that was for a shopping center in Flemington. Now, interestingly, I have the institutional memory. I go to meetings, I hear developers bitch and moan about what people could have been thinking about, like how stupid, all the process. The process still reflected some misgivings that New Jersey had about TIF and about the gambling nature of it. So even though we finally got something through the legislature, because we had an influential lobbyist, we had motivated legislators, On the inside, we had a vigorous debate about what TIF was. As a staffer, I had to, I had my own misgivings. I did research. I was in cahoots with the Assistant State Treasurer for Economic Development to do research. I went to Wall Street, find out how many states were issuing TIF bonds. I tried to really find out what was going on because, as I later learned with TIF, there's a lot of hype out there, and if you really try to drill down, it may not be as popular as it looks. But I started to do that research in the early 2000s to help inform the process, because even though my job was to do what the legislators wanted, I felt that as a public servant, it was my job to try to create as good a debate as possible with correct, valuable information. And so that was what happened with the RAD bill. It went through a lot of iterations. It went through a lot of scrutiny of big cast of characters. There was, I remember distinctly, the debate before the Budget Committee. It got a hearing, it got a vetting, and there were a lot of serious people looking at it. I'm not so sure the legislators were that concerned about what concerned us as staff, but they listened to us. So that was RAD. And then we came to ERG, and I was already gone by the time ERG came. So quickly, what I could understand from ERG is that staff was less involved. When I left, I was the Assistant State Treasurer for Economic Development, and when I left in, I guess it was about May of 2000 and, when was it? I don't know, 2008, or whenever I left, I was the last Assistant State Treasurer for Economic Development. And the importance of that person is that somebody has to be at the table in these debates, somebody whose job it is to balance the budget, who can ask the tough questions. What I saw happen, and I was, my last involvement with economic development was working on Transit Hub 1. And in Transit Hub 1, I think we had already lost that ability to have somebody from Treasury taking a serious look and pushing back internally. At the same time, there was no public debate, really. So, and the thing I noticed about ERG, and I realize I have probably running out of time, is that the fiscal note was posted after the bill was already released from the Assembly Budget Committee. So clearly, and all of the estimates of the impact of ERG were considered indeterminate. So OLS was doing its job, who knew? But, you know, the state was willing to gamble. So I guess the final point I would say is that it's great to have all kinds of reports done through, or if we're going to do, have a more serious look at ERG, but somebody has to be there to read them. Government is being depopulated. So if we're going to have any kind of serious look or serious submissions, then there should be some thought given to how you finance people in government to actually do serious looking, because otherwise there's nobody there to read the reports and it will be a useless endeavor. And secondly, how you curb a program that's targeted geographically. During my time, we went from 5 urban enterprise zones to 33, and Salem County being a tax-free area. The momentum is towards having a program that everybody wants, and we have no fiscal restraint and no discipline. So I suggest that when you think about those recommendations and flesh them out, those are some things to look at as well. Thank you very much.